teacher friends. Kristian Kuhn coming at you, affectionately known as the Bob Ross of composition. I'm going to assume you're here because you want an easier, softer way to work around the traditional grading paradigm. So that's what we're going to do for the next few minutes. Take a look at one of my alternative grading methods that I call 190, 80, 70 roulette. Here's how I'm going to set up the video. I'll give you a cursory overview of it first so that if you're not using my heuristics, you can just use it using whatever rubric that you are working with, whether it be a state exam or the AP rubrics. But then to really make this work at an effective and super efficient level, my heuristics are kind of the cornerstone of my alternative grading methods. And my heuristics are what really allow me to step away from the traditional grading paradigm. So then I'll go over my heuristics for the introductory paragraphs just to give you a sense of like a real deep dive alternative grading method if you decide to go the route of my heuristics. Before we jump in, please subscribe and tell your friends and colleagues far and wide to subscribe to my new YouTube channel. It's called Kristian Kuhn, the Bob Ross of composition. So we're growing quickly, which absolutely tickles me. So let's talk about the traditional grading paradigm. One of the reasons why I totally dislike it is this, and this might resonate with you teachers. Nowhere in our contracts does it stipulate that we are mandated to compulsory unpaid overtime. Very early in my career, and I've been teaching longer, more than 2 decades. Very early in my career, I realized that I was working way above and beyond my contractual hours. And I said, geez, I'm not getting paid for this. And, I'm trying to raise a family, trying to have some work-life balance. What's precluding me from doing this? And the culprit was the traditional grading paradigm. It was robbing me of my weekends and evenings. And I said, I got to find a better way because I don't want to do this for the next 30 plus years of my life. Another thing that I don't like about the traditional grading paradigm is you have to ask yourself the question ultimately, who's doing the heavy lifting? And I think in terms of learning to happen, you got to share the onus. So I did my graduate work at Brown University and had the privilege of working with Theodore Sizer quite a bit. He was my mentor teacher. And he always emphasized the fact that the onus of learning must be at minimum a 50-50 split. And he liked it at 75% on the student, 25 on the learner. And I was like, geez, how can I come up with a grading methodology that really shifts that focus? Because if you really break it down, we're doing 99.9% of the heavy lifting in this. I mean, what are we asking students to do? At most, read our comments and say, yes, I love Mr. Kuhn. He gave me a 98, or Mr. Kuhn's the biggest jerk on the face of the earth. He gave me a 72. So they internalize it that way. And they look at the grades, and we know some of the kids don't even look at our comments. So it's kind of futile for us to be spending that amount of time, scribbling commentary in the margins of their paper. So another thing that I want to talk about is this. All right, if you give me 100 students and I put an ocean of red ink in their margins, to what extent can I expect them to grow and mature as a writer? Again, right? Have the eureka moment here. It's futile, right? They really don't grow and mature from feedback. I'm not saying feedback isn't good, but if that's the exclusive means at which we are expecting students to catapult as writers and flourish as writers, then we're kind of mistaken. There's better ways. And then the last thing I want to talk about is this. In alternative grading methods, we cease to be the covetous lords of composition. And here's what I mean by that. In the traditional grading paradigm, students don't see student work. Teacher sees all of the student work. In alternative grading methods, students are teaching each other. So I'm convinced of this. The more writing the student sees, the better they become. Right? And in alternative grading methods, Students are looking at each other's work, holding each other accountable, and that's where that onus gets shared and shifted. So let's talk about 190, 80, 70 roulette as an alternative grading method. Let me talk about the setup and the guidelines. So here's how this works at face level. Students submit their essays and I read them. I don't leave any comments whatsoever. And in reading them, I write down on a notebook the grade I think the kid deserves. All right, the grade the kid earned. And what I do from the stack is this. Anonymously, I will pull 100 because at my school district we go numeric. Even though I do AP and Regents exams in New York State, we do have to convert it to a 50 to 100 scale. So I'll pull 100 anonymously from the stack. I will anonymously pull a 90 and 80, and then I'll write the 70 because I don't want to embarrass the kid. All right. And what we'll do is this. I plug little components of the essay into a Canvas slide for the purposes of hosting a writing workshop. And what we'll do is we'll start with the introduction. That's how I usually do it. So we'll take a look at declarative and inverted theses, and we'll break down each of the 4 introductions. I will not tell the kid which is the 100, the 90, the 80, the 70. They have to figure that out. And I'll model this in just a second for you with introductions. So we'll talk about all the facets and components of what makes a 100 introductory paragraph, the gradation down to 90, the gradation down to 80, the gradation down to 70. And the kids in the peanut gallery, I say this to them. Out of the gate, what does your introduction look like most? The 100, the 90, the 80, the 70, and you can go in between and say it's like an 85, it's like a 95. And here's the thing, in the margin though, I don't want them just to write down numbers. I want them to begin a conversation with me. Why is your introduction looking like an 80? Right? What are you doing well and where is it deficient? So usually for each aspect of the heuristic or each aspect of the rubric, my students are commenting in their margin, critiquing their paper. Here's why I like that. In the traditional grading paradigm, the teacher is exclusively having a monologue, all right? The student doesn't have a chance to explain anything or talk to us about their writing. There's no reflection. It's just they write and then they passively submit it to us, right? For use and surrender. And in this, it's actually a conversation in the alternative grading methods. Student begins the conversation and I will respond to their margin notes. So what we do is critique all aspects of the heuristic. And if you're familiar with my heuristics, you know that I focus on things like tier 2 level vocabulary, sentence types, sentence patterns, embedded quotes, all that stuff that, we tend to look at in writing, the grammar, the punctuation, the syntax, the mechanics. We will look at all of that stuff in terms of the gradations from 190, 80, 70. So just to give you a quick example, if we're looking at an introduction for rhetorical analysis, we know that we're going to use the 3+1 paradigm of the declarative thesis. So the 100 is going to execute that perfectly. The 90 is going to have a couple small glitches. The 80 is going to be a step down. And then the 70 that I write, I tend to really botch it and think about all the common errors, snafus, and pitfalls that kids hit. And I write those manifestly in that 70. So at the end of the exercise, when you go through everything that you want to put your students' noses in, at the end of the essay, I ask them to do this. Write me 3 learning targets. What's 3 things that you need to work on in the next subsequent essay? And then the big one is this. I say in exactly 5 sentences, Write me the grades you think you deserve. And again, don't tell me about your effort. Like everybody has effort when they write. So keep effort out of it. The grades you deserve based on the quality of your writing. And if we are within a 5-point margin of error, I'll give you the higher grade. Because you got to keep in mind, on a notebook, I wrote down the grade I think the kid deserved. So let's say that I wrote down 88 and the kid said 92. We're within 5 points, so I'll give them the higher grade. Then they submit their papers to me, and I have all that feedback. I have ample opportunity to have a conversation, and I can say things like, hey, you overlook this, or hey, I totally agree with you. And going forward, let's focus on this. So enough of that. I've talked into the ether enough, right? One last caveat. Here's the kicker. You got to use heuristics or something like a template so that you have shared language. So my students know all the parlance for the 20 sentence patterns, the 20 sentence types. They know about first premise, second premise, conclusion, the 5-word rule, declare, invert, right? So we all share the same language, and it works very well so that our verbiage is aligned. Otherwise it doesn't work. And then the other kicker is this: you gotta Bob Ross your instruction. To get my students to write at the caliber that they're writing at, I get to the proverbial easel and canvas all the time. I'm always writing with and for them using heuristics. Just like Bob Ross used the wet on wet technique, I used a couple of heuristics for the introductory paragraphs in terms of housing and anchoring the thesis. And then the body paragraphs, we always go syllogistically. So let me run through a sample writing workshop in which I would use the 190, 80, 70 roulette. So I asked my students the question, so how do you write the intro? And they should intuitively, instinctually know, Mr. Kuhn, we know that given that we're doing rhetorical analysis, we have to declare the thesis and use the declarative thesis heuristic. So let me demonstrate this with a rhetorical analysis we just did this past week. And I do have the full length video of this in my YouTube channel if you want. So we use Gloria's monologue from this past summer's Barbie movie. And we critiqued it in class together, did like a nice little Plato's Plato discussion with it. And students were able to read it thoroughly, and we ascertained all the meaning and picked it apart. And here's what we talk about in the writing workshop. And again, this is, again, so that we have common parlance, common verbiage in terms of dissecting our writing together. So implicit in all FRQ2 prompts on the AP Lang exam, and this is also true of FRQ1 and FRQ2 for the AP Literature exam, there's kind of some top secret information going on. Implicit in those prompts, and you can go back to the 1970s and prove me right on this. Implicit in the prompts are 2 questions. How does the author construct meaning, and what is the author's intent? And basically, the declarative thesis template is this. It's a 3+1 paradigm. Students are going to take 3 sentences to answer that first question. How does the author construct meaning? Whenever you answer that question, it's a thesis statement. So they're going to lead with that sentence, lead by answering that question. That's why we call it declare. They're announcing the thesis in the first sentence of the body paragraph. And then they're going to use 1 sentence to answer the question, what is the authorial intent? So let me unpack that just a little bit. Everything that we're going to be looking for in the 190, 80, 70 roulette if we're looking at introductory paragraphs. So you got to begin with the thesis. You need some context and background, and usually the context and background takes the shape of universal truth, the exigence, universal theme. I teach word study extensively, so I want to see tier 2 level vocabulary in there in terms of like SAT level caliber words. I also focus a lot on sentence constructs in terms of the 12 types that Strunk and White talk about in rule number 18, and then the 20 sentence patterns. And I run my students through an extensive nuance academy, especially early in the year where we learn grammar, punctuation, syntax, like to be verb usage, passive voice constructs. So we have all this language that we share together. So let's break this down. We know we're going to have to do 3 plus 1. 3, how does the author construct meaning? 1, what is the author's intent? So in terms of Bob Rossian instruction, I would show kids how to do this first, all right? So let's see my exemplars, and then we'll talk about what the students would do. So here's exemplar number 1. I'll read it and then walk you through it. With a heavy focus on the all-encompassing you pronoun, Gloria delineates the shared plight of every woman seeking the elusive it of womanhood. The negating conjunctions highlight the futility of the battle. While women try to fit into certain societal modes, somehow and in some way, they get canceled by the flip side of the coin. The struggle is endless and ceaselessly painstaking, which is reflected through the litany of concrete examples. As ironic as it may appear, the predicament is even shared with a doll who represents the epitome of feminine beauty. So, real quickly, not to belabor my heuristics, but you can see here that this is a 3 plus 1 paradigm. So, I wrote it, so we'll say student wrote it, and I'm focusing on 3 of the most salient rhetorical moves in the Barbie monologue, in Gloria's monologue. So, we got the syntax and the you pronoun. We got the irony and we got the litany, right? So it's always 3, like the 3 things that construct the meaning. And then I definitely have the exigence or the universal theme or the universal truth sprinkled in there with 1 sentence, right? And it's always 4 sentences long. All right. So in terms of doing that in a class, if a student were to write that, we would say ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. That's 100 all day long. All right, just to familiarize you with my heuristic, let's see it again in case you want to roll this with your students. So here's another one. Again, we're just going to go 3 plus 1 declarative thesis. As ironic as it may sound, not even Barbie, a doll who is the poster child for femininity, can satisfy the absurd social expectations of being an ideal woman. In juxtaposing idealism with stark social realities, Gloria delineates the hypocrisy through the frequent employment of negating conjunctions. Further, the elusive it that all women seek is frustratingly unattainable. No matter how much a woman tries to be a social representation of ideal womanhood, she is certain to fail. And one of the things I talk about with my students is you kind of got to teeter-totter the implicit and the explicit. So sometimes in my introductions, I'll explicitly state the term. So like here I'm talking about conjunctions, but you can get into like ethos, pathos, logos without saying ethos, pathos, logos. And then when you move on to the body paragraph heuristic of the syllogistic method, you oscillate between explicit and implicit to avoid redundancies and that, quality that sounds as if a kid is using a paint by numbers template. I don't want that. So it's always 3 plus 1, right? So if we're doing this in class, student writes that, I think the students in my class would say, that's pretty flawless. That's 100. Like, and then you can even talk in terms of AP, the sophistication point, the complexity, all that kind of stuff. All right, just to really solidify it, let me show you one more. And this is what I do with my students. I usually show them 3 times. I usually Bob Ross 3 times, and then they're independent and can rock and roll on their own. Gloria elucidates the strange irony of women aspiring to be a woman. It quite simply is an unattainable and futile pursuit. So you can see there, I explicitly said irony. So now I need to focus on 2 more, 3 construction of meaning through a long litany. So I said it. And negating conjunctions, I said it. She points out what the feminine ideal looks like. But once a woman approximates these traits, She's deemed as being snooty, pretentious, and the like. This it that women collectively seek is a confounding mirage. And the thing is this, not even a doll who is the face of feminine beauty can lasso this thing that all women struggle to find and pin down. So again, all day long, ka-ching, 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 ka-ching. That's gonna get us the 100. So that's what we do for the 190, 80, 70. All right. So I guess the big thing that I want to reiterate is this. If your students and you know thy heuristics, you can really rock and roll and crush these alternative grading methods and free up your evening and weekends, establish a good, work life balance, and free yourself from that endless heap of essays that need to be graded. All right, I'm signing off, my friends. If you need to reach out to me, teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com, feel free to drop me a line. Know that I'm a lead teacher for National Writing Project. I present for NCTE quite often, Perfection Learning, College Board occasionally. And you can stay abreast of my comings and goings at www.teachinghowtowrite.com in terms of like webinars, conferences, professional development offerings, etc. Students that may be watching this know that I have a tutoring company that I call Write at Ivy Write. I, in particular, mainly with that company, work on college personal statements and supplements. So if you're applying to school and want top-notch supplements and personal statements, I'm expert on that. So I used to work admissions at Brown. I did my graduate work at Brown, so very familiar with what the upper echelon schools are expecting. So just drop me an email and we can talk specifics. All right, I'm signing off. I'll present more alternative grading methods down the road and I'll keep pushing out content. Take care.